For thousands of years, the idea of God in the West was pretty much set in stone. A personal, all-powerful being, kind of like a king on a throne who made the world and was actively running the show. And that image was incredibly stable. It shaped everything, our laws, our art, our entire inner lives. But over the last few centuries, that image started to come under some serious fire from a whole new wave of thinking. It started to crack and shift, and in the end, totally transform. Now, this isn't just a story about people stop believing. It's way more interesting than that. It's about how belief itself was reinvented. So today, we're going to chart that great unraveling. We'll explore how science and philosophy didn't just question God, but forced us to completely reimagine what divine even means, moving it from some faraway heaven right into the fabric of the universe itself. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we've got to set the stage. We'll look at that classic old-school concept of God that was the bedrock for centuries. Then, we're going to watch as a series of scientific bombshells start to pull that whole idea apart. After that, we'll turn to the philosophers. They're the ones standing in the rubble, trying to figure out how to build a sense of meaning in this brand new cosmos. And finally, we'll check out the really cool and diverse spiritual ideas that grew out of all this chaos, ideas that are still shaping how we think about the divine right now.
So before we can really get our heads around how huge this change was, we have to understand what it was that changed. To feel the full impact of these modern ideas, we need a crystal clear picture of the original concept, the one that wasn't just seen as a belief, but as a basic, undisputed fact of life.
This is what you'll hear scholars call classical theism. And the key thing to get here is that this wasn't some vague, fuzzy force or an abstract principle. No, this was a God with a personality, with intentions, with a will. This God was a divine lawmaker, handing down absolute moral codes. He was a cosmic judge who'd make sure you followed them. And maybe most importantly, this was a being you could have a real relationship with, someone who might actually step into your life, answer a prayer, or even perform a miracle. It gave the world a sense of order, a purpose, and a clear moral compass. It was the default setting for pretty much everyone.
Right, an idea this powerful, this deeply woven into the fabric of society, doesn't just fade away. It had to be taken apart, piece by piece. And it wasn't one single argument that did it. It was more like a tidal wave of new knowledge and new ways of thinking that completely changed our picture of reality itself. So what were these forces?
Well, the unraveling really kicks off with the rise of modern science. More than anything else, a series of world-changing discoveries acted like a kind of powerful acid, slowly and systematically dissolving the certainties that held that classical idea of God together. Every single discovery redrew the map of the universe, and in doing so, it shrank the territory where that old God could live.
And look, this wasn't a single event. It was this incredible domino effect that played out over hundreds of years. It starts in the 1600s with Newton's vision of a universe that runs like a clock. Then you get Darwin in biology, Hubble in astronomy, and finally, the birth of quantum mechanics in physics. Each one of these dominoes knocked over another key piece of the traditional, hands-on, supernatural God.
Okay, so the first big shift comes from Isaac Newton. His laws of motion and gravity showed a universe that was just stunningly elegant. It all ran on fixed, predictable mathematical rules. And all of a sudden, you didn't really need God to be constantly meddling to keep the planets in their orbits. This gave birth to Deism, this idea of God as a divine watchmaker, a genius craftsman who built this perfect machine, wound it up, and then just stepped back to let it run. It was the first major step in turning God from a micromanager into a distant, brilliant architect.
Then, our entire perspective just exploded outwards. Geologists found evidence for deep time, showing that the Earth wasn't thousands of years old, but billions. Astronomers like Edwin Hubble showed us that our galaxy wasn't the only one. There were billions of them scattered across these vast, empty spaces. And in this new, frankly terrifyingly huge cosmos, the idea that God's main focus was just one species on one little planet started to seem, well, a little small town, almost provincial. Any idea of the divine now had to be grand enough to match this new scale, pushing it away from a human-like figure towards something much more abstract.
Next up, Charles Darwin. And boy, was his theory of evolution a shock to the system. Before Darwin, the sheer complexity of life, the human eye, the wing of a bird, was seen as the ultimate proof of a divine designer. But Darwin offered this incredibly powerful natural process that could create all that complexity over millions of years, no supernatural help needed. This is where we get the concept of the God of the gaps, the habit of using God to explain anything science hasn't figured out yet. And with every new discovery, the gaps where that God could hide were getting smaller and smaller.
And then, just when it seemed like science had everything locked down in a nice, predictable box, quantum mechanics came along and just pulled the rug out from under everybody. It showed us that at the most fundamental level, reality wasn't made of tiny, solid things. It was this weird, probabilistic web of energy, where just the act of looking at something could change the outcome. Newton's perfect clockwork universe just dissolved. And this deep, deep weirdness cracked the door wide open for brand new spiritual ideas, ones that weren't about a king on a throne, but about things like universal consciousness and the interconnectedness of everything.
So, with the scientific foundations for the old God crumbling, the ball was now in the philosopher's court. Science had completely redrawn the map of reality, and now they had to deal with it. They were looking at a universe that was ancient, enormous, seemingly random, and fundamentally bizarre. Their job was to try and build new ways to think about meaning, morality, and even God itself on this really shaky new ground.
The great Immanuel Kant came up with this brilliant solution. He basically built a firewall. He argued that, yes, science is powerful, but it's got its limits. It can only study the world of appearances, the stuff we can see and measure, what he called phenomena. But God, morality, free will, he said those things exist in a whole different realm beyond our senses, the noumena. So you could never prove or disprove God with a telescope. Instead, Kant said we have to assume God exists for a morality to even make sense. He essentially saved God from science by moving it into a completely different category.
Friedrich Nietzsche, well, he took a much more explosive approach. When he famously declared God is dead, he wasn't celebrating, it was a dire warning. He meant that the idea of the Christian God could no longer hold up as the foundation for truth and morality in the West. And with that foundation gone, he saw a huge crisis coming. Humanity was now adrift in a meaningless universe. We had killed the source of our values, and now we had the terrifying job of creating our own, or else we'd just fall into despair and nihilism.
But not all philosophy ended up in a godless universe. Thinkers like Alfred North Whitehead came up with a concept that actually fit really well with modern science. It's called process philosophy. He tossed out that old idea of God as some perfect, unchanging being who exists outside of time. Instead, he pictured a process God, who isn't a ruler from on high, but is actually woven into the creative, messy unfolding of the universe itself, a God who is evolving with creation. In this view, God is more like a gentle, persuasive force, nudging the universe toward more complexity and beauty. Not a king, but a partner in the cosmic dance.
Okay, so after all that upheaval, where are we now? Well, this whole intellectual earthquake didn't just leave behind an empty crater. Instead, it created this really fascinating, fertile ground for all sorts of new spiritual ideas to grow. Each of the concepts we're about to look at is a serious attempt to find a place for the sacred that makes sense with our modern scientific picture of the world.
One of the most powerful modern ideas is pantheism. This is the view you often hear associated with brilliant minds like Spinoza and even Albert Einstein. The idea is simple but profound. God isn't a person in the universe. God is the universe. The beautiful, elegant laws of physics, the complex web of life, the insane grandeur of a galaxy. That's not just God's creation, that is God. So for a pantheist, the spiritual experience is that feeling of awe you get when you just stop and contemplate the incredible order and mystery of the cosmos.
Now, a really popular modern twist on this is panentheism. The difference is subtle, but it's everything. Panentheism says that, yes, the universe is in God. You can think of the cosmos as God's body, but God is also more than the universe. God's consciousness transcends it all. It's a clever way to have it both ways. You get a God who is present in every single particle, but you also get a transcendent, personal mind that's greater than the sum of all its parts. And for some, the final logical step in this journey was to just detach spirituality from the supernatural completely. And that's where you get secular humanism. The argument here is that all those profound experiences we call spiritual, like awe, wonder, deep connection, search for meaning, all of that can be found and nurtured without any need for a God. In this worldview, the sacred isn't out there in some deity, it's in here, in human potential, in the beauty of nature, in the power of art, and in the incredible adventure of scientific discovery. When you lay all these pathways out together like this, you can really see the pattern, can't you? Each one of these is a smart, sophisticated way of grappling with the world science has shown us. You can literally see the concept of God changing right in front of you, from being the universe, to containing it, to being a creative force inside it, and finally to being a concept that isn't even necessary anymore for a rich spiritual life. So if there's one big idea to take away from all this, it's this. The idea of God wasn't simply erased by science, it was profoundly transformed. More than anything, the divine was relocated. It moved from a place up there, in some distant heaven, totally separate from the world, and it was found down here. It was integrated into the laws of physics, woven into the messy, creative process of evolution, and rediscovered in the mysterious depths of our own consciousness. The search for God basically became a search for the deepest truths about reality itself.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really fascinating question to chew on. You could look at this whole story and see it as the long retreat of God, a concept that's just shrinking into smaller and smaller gaps in our knowledge. But there's another way to see it. Maybe our definition of the divine is finally just growing up. Maybe it's expanding from a small, human-centered idea into a concept that's finally vast enough and mysterious enough to be worthy of the incredible universe that science has revealed to us. The quest hasn't ended, it's just gotten a whole lot bigger.